Don't drink that glass. Every head snapped toward the service door. A gaunt woman, 27 years old, in a wrinkled server's uniform, knocked down 2 security guards and hurled herself into the grand hall as if someone's life depended on every second. Behind her, an 8-year-old girl, hair tangled, knees scraped raw, ran after her, mouth opening, but no sound coming out. 400 guests in Dior and Armani froze for a beat. Security surged forward. The woman fought like a cornered animal, her eyes bloodshot, her desperation naked. Mr. Ashford's drink. Someone put poison in it. At the head table, Conrad Ashford, the billionaire, the most celebrated philanthropist in Chicago, had just lifted a flute of champagne toward his lips. His hand locked in midair. Harrison Cole, his half-brother, in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, shot up from his chair. His face went pale in an instant, then flushed hot red. "Security! Get this crazy woman out of here now!" But the mute little girl suddenly raised her hand. Her trembling finger pointed straight at Harrison Cole. Then she began to sign, each motion slow, clear, and final. The woman translated, her voice shaking, but not once hesitating. "She says he put something into the glass." From a small brown vial in the left inside pocket of his suit jacket, while everyone was clapping. The entire hall stopped breathing. Conrad Ashford's champagne remained suspended, only a few centimeters from his mouth. What did a homeless woman and the mute child she took in see that the 400 richest people in Chicago couldn't see? If you want to know the horrifying secret the mute girl has kept for 2 years, please hit like right now to support the channel. Share this video with anyone who needs the reminder. Never underestimate anyone. And subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you won't miss stories like this that reach straight into the heart. Harrison Cole laughed. The sound rang out in the dead silent grand hall, sharp, icy, and dripping with contempt. He rose to his feet, smoothing the front of his Tom Ford jacket, as if he'd just heard the most pathetic joke of his life. "Did you all hear that?" He turned to the crowd, arms spread wide like an actor on a stage. "A deaf, mute child and a ragged table server have just accused me of poisoning my own brother. Right here, at my family's charity gala." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Eyes swung toward Colette, not with trust or sympathy, with disdain. The look of 400 wealthy people staring down at someone who didn't belong in their world. A woman in a Chanel dress sniffed. "Look at her. She's probably on something and hallucinating. She wants money." Another man's voice chimed in. "Girls like that only know how to take advantage." Colette felt as if 1,000 needles were piercing her skin. She tightened her grip on Rosie's hand, feeling the small fingers trembling in her palm, but she didn't step back. She couldn't. Not after everything they'd been through. Harrison walked toward them, every step carrying the easy confidence of a man used to holding power in his hands. He stopped less than a meter from Colette and lowered his voice, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "Who do you think you are? Who's going to believe a homeless woman?" Colette swallowed, but her gaze didn't waver. "They will when they test that glass." Harrison blinked, just for a fraction of a second, but Colette saw it. Fear, a flicker like a ghost, but unmistakable. He turned to the security guards, his voice sharpening. "What are you standing around for? Get these two out of here. Call the police. Trespassing and defamation." 2 guards moved in, hands already reaching for Colette's arms. Rosie shrank back, eyes wide with terror. "Stop!" The voice wasn't loud, but it froze the entire hall, as if someone had pressed a pause button. Beckett Crane stood up from a table near the corner of the room. 6'1", broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back, a face that looked carved from granite. His black 3-piece suit wasn't as flashy as Harrison's, but it carried a different kind of power, the kind that didn't need to show off. The crowd parted like water before the bow of a ship as he walked forward. No one dared block him. No one dared ask, because everyone in that room knew exactly who Beckett Crane was. The boss who controlled the entire casino and real estate system on the east side of Chicago. The man the police wouldn't touch. The man politicians bowed to. The man even Harrison Cole had to be wary of. Harrison tried to keep his composure, but his jaw tightened. "Beckett, this is my family's matter. It has nothing to do with you." Beckett didn't look at him. His cold gray eyes were fixed on the champagne flute still on the table, bubbles rising softly beneath the crystal lights. "I donated $2 million to the charity tonight," he said, his voice low and even. "I think that gives me the right to know whether I'm drinking poisoned liquor or not." A faint chuckle moved through the crowd, but no one truly laughed. The air felt taut as a drawn wire. Beckett turned to the head of security. "Bring the toxin test kit. Test Mr. Ashford's glass." The head of security hesitated, glancing at Harrison as if waiting for instruction. Harrison snarled, "This is a farce. You've got no authority to give orders here." "No authority?" Beckett finally looked at Harrison. His stare was so cold it seemed to drop the temperature of the air around them by several degrees. "Then what are you afraid of? If the glass is clean, this girl gets arrested for defamation. You win. But if you stop the test..." He tipped his head slightly, lips curving into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Then everyone in here will start asking why." Silence. Harrison stood there, fists clenched at his sides, his face flushing red, then draining pale. He knew he was being backed into a corner. Refusing the test would be the same as admitting there was something to hide. Conrad Ashford, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. He was still seated, the champagne long since set down on the table, his aged face swallowed in shadow. "Test it." Only 2 words, but they carried the weight of the man who owned the entire coal industries empire. Harrison whipped toward his brother, eyes wide. "You can't be serious." "I said test it," Conrad repeated, his voice heavier. "If you're innocent, you've got nothing to fear." The head of security didn't wait another second. He took a testing kit from the emergency medical case, something that had been kept on hand at all VIP events ever since the terrorist attack in 2001. The entire hall held its breath. 400 people turned to stone. Colette felt her heart pounding hard enough to break out of her chest. The head of security dripped a few drops from the glass into a test tube, added reagent, shook it gently. Then he looked up. His face had gone paper white. The solution had turned a pale blue. Positive. The head of security's voice trembled, as if he himself couldn't believe what he was seeing. Cyanide. A concentration high enough to be fatal within 15 minutes. 1 second of absolute silence. Then hell broke open. A woman's scream tore through the air like a blade against glass. The crowd of 400 erupted into panic. Chairs toppled. Glasses hit the floor and shattered with sharp, splintering crashes across the marble. People surged and shoved, trampling over one another as they rushed toward the emergency exits. Dior and Versace gowns ripped. High heels snapped and buckled. Screams, sobs, and frantic voices calling names collided into a single, chaotic symphony of fear. Conrad Ashford remained seated, unmoving as stone. He stared at the champagne on the table, the very drink he'd almost lifted to his lips minutes ago. Then, slowly, he turned and looked at Harrison. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was the gaze of a man who had just realized he'd been living with an enemy for decades without ever knowing it. "You..." Conrad's voice came out rough, shredded. "You were going to kill me?" Harrison took a step back. Then another. His eyes darted wildly, like a trapped animal driven into a corner. "No, this is a setup. Someone set me up. You have to believe me, Conrad. You're my brother. Handcuff him." Beckett Crane's voice cut across Harrison's words like a knife. He didn't raise his volume, but the command carried a weight no one could resist. 2 security guards moved in. Harrison fought. "You don't have the right. I'm Harrison Cole. I'm the CFO of Coal Industries. Do you know who I am?" The metal cuffs clicked shut, cold and final. Harrison was shoved down, his knees cracking against the hard marble. He threw his head up, his face twisted with rage and desperation. And then his stare locked onto Colette. She was still standing there, her hand clenched around Rosie's, thin and small in the middle of the chaos. But she wasn't shaking. She met his eyes with something he couldn't understand. Hatred. Not the sudden hatred of someone freshly insulted. This was hatred that had been fed for a long time. Hatred with roots, sunk deep into the past. Harrison froze. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see her face more clearly. Thinner, paler, hair snarled instead of neatly styled, but something about her was familiar. Something that made his memory begin to open, slowly, like the door to a dark basement. "You," he faltered, eyes widening. "Who are you? What do you know about me?" Colette didn't answer. She simply stood there in silence, letting her gaze say everything. But Harrison didn't need an answer, because in that moment, he remembered. This face, these eyes. 3 years ago, he had seen those eyes at St. Mary's Hospital. The young nurse who had dared to refuse him. The young nurse whose life he had crushed for the crime of not knowing her place. "You," Harrison whispered, his voice shaking. "Colette Shaw." Colette smiled. A smile with no warmth, only ice. "So you remember me," Harrison roared like a wounded beast, thrashing against the guards. "You think you've beaten me? You're nothing but a worm. I crushed you once. I'll do it again. You and that deaf-mute girl will die. I swear it. I'll make the two of you disappear from this earth." Rosie recoiled, clinging to Colette's leg. But Colette didn't flinch. She had survived hell. She wasn't afraid of a demon's threats anymore. Police sirens wailed outside. Red and blue lights swept across the towering glass doors of the hall. Harrison was dragged away, still screaming curses and threats, lifted and shoved through the doors, vanishing into the night with the sirens fading into the distance. Colette stood there, watching his shadow disappear. 2 years. 2 years she had waited for this moment. 2 years she had lived like a ghost on the streets, just to keep Rosie safe, just to wait for one chance. And tonight, that chance had come, but she knew this was only the beginning. Harrison Cole was a venomous snake, and a venomous snake, even locked in a cage, could still bite someone to death. The grand hall was empty now, like a graveyard after a storm. Broken glass glittered across the floor. Chairs lay overturned in messy heaps. Decorative bouquets had been trampled into muddy pulp. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with spilled champagne, forming something so sweet it turned nauseating. Only a few people remained. Conrad Ashford was still sitting there, as if he'd aged 10 years in a single night. Beckett Crane stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, watching everything with gray eyes that gave nothing away. And Colette, still gripping Rosie's hand, stood in the middle of the hall like two lost ghosts. Conrad rose slowly. He walked toward Colette, each step heavy, as if he were carrying a mountain of thoughts. He stopped in front of her, studied her for a long time, then looked down at Rosie. "Who are you?" His voice was tired, but there wasn't the contempt the others had shown. "How did you know what my brother was going to do? Why did he say your name like he'd known you before?" Colette drew in a deep breath. She'd been waiting for that question. She'd been preparing for this moment for 2 years. "My name's Colette Shaw. 3 years ago, I was a nurse at Street, Mary's hospital." She paused, her voice trembling slightly but still clear. "Harrison Cole was admitted after a minor car accident. He flirted with me. I turned him down. A week later, 200 morphine pills disappeared from the pharmacy. Security footage showed someone who looked like me going into the storage room at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was arrested, interrogated, and stripped of my license. No one believed me. No one investigated. I lost my job, my home, everything, in a single month." Conrad closed his eyes, as if forcing himself to swallow something bitter. "My brother did that? He crushed my life because I dared to say no," Colette answered, her voice steady. "But that's not why I'm here tonight." She looked down at Rosie. The girl was still clinging to her, wide eyes lifted as if asking whether she should trust these adults. Colette gave Rosie's hand a small squeeze, sending the message that everything would be all right. "This is Rosie, Rosie Dawson," Colette said. "Vera Dawson's daughter." Conrad frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it right away. Vera Dawson was Harrison's personal secretary. Colette continued. 2 years ago, she found out Harrison was embezzling company money, $150 million. She copied the evidence onto a USB drive and planned to bring it to you. But before she could, Colette's voice caught. She had to breathe a few times before she could go on. Vera was shot to death, right in front of her daughter. Rosie was only 6. She saw everything. She saw her mother collapse into a pool of blood. She saw the killer, and from that night on, she couldn't speak anymore. Silence fell over the hall, so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Conrad Ashford staggered back, gripping the back of a chair so he wouldn't fall. "My God," he whispered. "Vera Dawson. I remember her. She quit suddenly 2 years ago. Harrison said she'd moved to another state for family reasons." "She didn't quit," Colette said, her voice bitter. "She was murdered, and the police closed the case because they decided it was an armed robbery. No one investigated further. No one believed a mute child. Rosie was sent to an orphanage. She ran away. She lived on the streets for months, until I found her in a dark alley last winter." Colette looked Conrad straight in the eyes. "Vera was my friend. She was the only one who believed me when the whole world turned its back. She died trying to find justice for me, for your company, for everyone Harrison cheated, and I swore on her grave that I'd make Harrison pay." Conrad lifted a hand to cover his face. His shoulders shook. No one could tell whether he was crying or fighting to hold back his fury. Throughout the entire exchange, Beckett Crane stood still as stone, not saying a word, but his gray eyes missed nothing. He watched the way Colette shielded Rosie, the way she held herself upright despite being thin and exhausted, the way she spoke about her friend with a kind of feeling money couldn't buy. He stepped forward, his leather shoes tapping softly against the marble. "Miss Shaw," he said, his voice low and even, no clear emotion on the surface. "You know Harrison won't stay in jail long, don't you?" Colette turned to him, her eyes wary. "What are you saying? He's got money. He's got lawyers. He's got judges in his pocket," Beckett said bluntly. "Tonight's evidence is only an attempted murder accusation. No direct witness saw him put poison in the glass. The testimony of a mute child and a homeless woman will get torn apart in court. He could be out on bail tomorrow." Colette felt the blood in her body turn cold. "And when he's out," Beckett continued, his voice still ice, "he'll come looking to kill you. Kill the child too, because you're the only threat he's got." Colette tightened her hold on Rosie, her heart hammering out of control. "So what are you suggesting?" Beckett studied her, gray eyes measuring something. "I've got a few debts with Harrison Cole," he said, "and I always pay my debts. Let me help you. Protect you and the child until he's truly behind bars." Colette looked at him, the man all of Chicago knew as a Mafia boss. She wasn't foolish. She knew there was no such thing as a free lunch. "And what do you want in return?" Beckett smiled, his first smile of the night. "In return, you helped me bury Harrison Cole for good." 3 years ago, Colette Shaw was 24, and she believed this life was fair. Every morning, she woke at 5 o'clock in a small one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs of Chicago. She brewed a cup of coffee, watched the sun rise through a tiny window, then put on the spotless white nurse's uniform she'd carefully washed and pressed the night before. She loved her work. She loved the feeling of caring for the sick, of seeing them recover, of hearing sincere thank yous from strangers. She believed that if she worked hard and lived kindly, life would answer her with good things. The ICU at Street Mary's Hospital was where Colette met Vera Dawson. Vera wasn't a patient. She came to visit her elderly mother, who was dying of late-stage cancer. Every evening after work, Vera stopped by, sat beside her mother's bed, held her hand, and told her about her day. Colette often came in to check on her, change medication, and little by little, the two young women began to talk. Vera was 6 years older than Colette. She worked as the personal secretary to a chief financial officer at Cole Industries. She had curly brown hair, a bright smile, and a 4-year-old daughter named Rosie, whom she loved more than her own life. Vera's mother died on a winter night. Colette was the one holding her hand in her final minutes, because Vera didn't make it from home in time. And from that night on, Vera treated Colette like a younger sister. They had lunch together every week. Vera often brought Rosie to the hospital to visit, and Colette taught the little girl how to draw hearts on sticky notes. Vera was the only one who knew Colette was saving money to go on to medical school. She was the one who encouraged Colette whenever she felt herself slipping into doubt, the one who texted goodnight every evening, the one who made Colette believe she wasn't alone in the world. Then Harrison Cole appeared. He was admitted one March afternoon after a minor car accident, just a few scrapes and a cracked rib, but because he was a VIP, the CFO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he was placed in a private room with special care. Colette was assigned to a shift. From the very first day, Harrison looked at her with a kind of gaze she didn't like. The gaze of someone used to getting whatever he wanted. He told her she was beautiful, asked if she had a boyfriend, said a girl like her deserved to live in a mansion, not work herself to the bone in a hospital. He invited her to dinner. Colette refused politely, saying it would violate hospital policy. He laughed and said policies were made by people with money and broken by people with money. Colette still refused. On the third day, Harrison grabbed her wrist while she was changing his bandage. He pulled her closer, his hot breath on her face. "Do you know who I am? I can buy this whole hospital. You should rethink my offer." Colette yanked her hand free, her heart beating out of control. "I'm your nurse, nothing else. Please respect that." She turned and walked away, without looking back. She didn't see Harrison's eyes as he watched her go. Cold, dark, like a snake denied its prey, and already calculating revenge. A week after Harrison was discharged, Colette was called to the director's office. 200 morphine pills had gone missing from the drug storage. Security cameras had captured someone with a similar build to hers entering the room at 2 o'clock in the morning. She was interrogated for 8 hours. She cried. She swore. She begged them to look closer, to find other evidence. But no one listened. No one believed her. The disciplinary board met and decided to revoke her license immediately. Colette called Vera through tears. Vera believed her. Vera was the only one who believed her. She said she would find a way to help. She would ask someone to investigate. But Colette didn't know Harrison Cole had eyes and ears everywhere. He knew Vera was her friend. And he remembered that. Without a license, Colette couldn't get hired at any hospital. She applied to dozens of places. Every one of them turned her away the moment they saw her record. Her savings drained away. Rent came due. The landlord refused to wait. A month after she was fired, Colette stood on the sidewalk with a suitcase of clothes and nowhere left to go. On her first night sleeping under a bridge, Colette cried until she had no tears left. She was 24. She had done everything right, studied hard, worked hard, treated people well. And this was what she received. A piece of cardboard on freezing concrete, the roar of traffic overhead, and the question with no answer spinning in her mind all night long. Why? Why was this world so unfair? She didn't know the real hell hadn't even begun yet. 6 months after Colette lost everything, Vera still didn't abandon her. Once a week, Vera drove to the places where she knew Colette usually sheltered, under the overpass on Interstate 94, the hidden corner behind St. Patrick's Church, the dark alley behind the laundromat on Halstead Street. Vera brought hot food, warm clothes, and sometimes cash that Colette always refused, but Vera still slipped into her coat pocket when she wasn't looking. Vera was the only thread still tying Colette to the world of ordinary people. "You've got to keep going," Vera said during one visit, eyes red and wet. "I'm trying to help you. Harrison Cole can't get away with this forever." Colette only gave a sad smile. She'd stopped hoping a long time ago. She was surviving day by day, no longer living in any real sense. Then, one night in November, Colette's phone buzzed. It was the old phone Vera had bought for her, already loaded with minutes so they could stay in touch. Vera's voice came through on the other end, breathless and shaking. "Colette, I found it. Evidence. I found evidence." Colette shot upright from her piece of cardboard, her heart slamming. "What evidence?" "Vera, what are you talking about?" "Harrison," Vera whispered, as if afraid someone might hear. "He's embezzling company money. $150 million. I'm his secretary. I handle paperwork every day. Today he forgot to lock his computer when he went into a meeting. I saw everything. Transfers to the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Delaware, fake invoices. It's all there with his signature." Colette felt the blood in her body turn cold. "Vera, it's dangerous. You've got to be careful." "I know," Vera said, "but I can't let it go. He destroyed your life. He's stealing money from the company, from thousands of employees, from shareholders who trust him. I copied it all onto a USB drive. Tomorrow I'm taking it to Conrad Ashford. He's the chairman, Harrison's brother. He'll know what to do." "Vera, don't," Colette begged. "You've got Rosie. You can't risk this." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Vera's voice came again, gentle but unshakable. "It's because I've got Rosie that I have to do this. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where evil has to pay. I want her to know her mother was someone who stood up for what was right, even if it meant facing a demon." That was the last time Colette ever heard Vera's voice. A week later, Colette found the story in an old newspaper someone had thrown into a trash can. Armed robbery in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. A woman, 31 years old, dead. The victim's 6-year-old daughter was present at the scene but unharmed. Colette read the name in the article again and again. Vera Dawson. The world collapsed. She didn't remember how long she screamed and sobbed in that dark alley. She didn't remember how many times she slammed her head against the wall. She only remembered the pain that ripped her chest apart as if someone were tearing her heart out with bare hands. Vera was dead, her only friend, the only person who still believed her, the only person who hadn't abandoned her, dead. And Colette knew it wasn't a robbery. She tried to find information about Rosie, the 6-year-old girl she had taught to draw hearts, the child she had held in her arms, the child she'd promised to be a godmother to if Vera would let her. But no one would tell her anything. She wasn't family. She was only a homeless woman with no right to ask about anyone. Only later did Colette manage to piece together the shattered fragments of what had really happened. That night, Vera left work late. She picked Rosie up from daycare, and the two of them walked home like they always did. The familiar route, the quiet neighborhood, dim yellow streetlights, Rosie skipping beside her mother, clutching the teddy bear she never let go of. They didn't see the black car parked at the corner. They didn't see the figure stepping out of the shadows. The gunshot. Vera went down. Blood spread across the sidewalk. Rosie stood there, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound coming out. She stared at her mother, lying motionless. Stared at her mother's eyes, still open, fixed on the night sky. Stared at the pool of blood widening and soaking into the little pink shoes on her feet. Then she looked up, looked straight into the face of the man holding the gun. He crouched, went through Vera's bag, finding only a decoy USB drive she had planted as a distraction, took her wallet, then vanished into the night. When the police arrived, Rosie was still standing there, frozen, silent, her hand still gripping the teddy bear soaked through with her mother's blood. They asked if she'd seen anything. She didn't answer. They asked if she hurt anywhere. She didn't answer. They asked her name. She still didn't answer. The doctor's diagnosis was severe psychological trauma leading to selective mutism. The girl wasn't deaf. She could hear everything, but she couldn't speak. Her brain had locked her voice away as a defense mechanism against pain too enormous to survive. The police ruled the case as armed robbery. The victim was shot because she didn't cooperate. No witnesses, no evidence. The file was closed after 2 weeks of investigation. Rosie was sent to street, Agnes orphanage, and Harrison Cole went on living his lavish life, as if Vera Dawson had never existed in this world at all. 8 months before the fateful gala night, Chicago was buried under a record-breaking December cold snap. Colette shivered inside an oversized men's coat she'd pulled from a trash bin behind a Salvation Army thrift store. The temperature had dropped below -15 degrees. The wind cut through skin and bone. She was trying to reach Street, Patrick's church, where they sometimes allowed homeless people to sleep in the basement on freezing winter nights. When she passed the dark alley behind the laundromat on Halsted Street, she heard a sound, soft, like the rustle of old newspapers, or the breathing of something small, trying to fold itself into the shadows. Colette stopped. Survival instinct told her to keep walking. Chicago streets at night weren't safe, especially not dark alleys. But something held her there. Something told her to look closer. She stepped into the alley, her eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness, and she saw it. A child, curled up inside a cardboard box, covered with old newspapers. Tiny, emaciated, lips purple with cold, eyes wide as they looked at Colette. Fear mixed with exhaustion. In the child's arms was a teddy bear, worn, filthy, but held tight like treasure. Colette's heart missed a beat. That teddy bear, she recognized it. She'd seen it dozens of times in the hands of a little girl who used to laugh, used to skip along, used to call her Aunt Colette in a clear, bright voice. "Rosie?" Colette's voice shook, not from the cold. "Rosie Dawson?" The child didn't answer. Only her eyes widened further, more frightened, like a wild creature cornered with nowhere left to run. Colette sank down slowly, careful not to startle her. "Do you remember me, Aunt Colette? Your mom's friend, Vera." At the name Vera, Rosie's eyes trembled. Tears rolled down her thin cheeks, already purple from the cold. She didn't speak, not a sound, but she nodded, slowly, as if she was afraid that if she moved too fast, the woman in front of her would vanish like all the other dreams. Colette pulled the girl into her arms. The small body was ice-cold against her chest, all bone, shaking, but alive, still breathing. "I'm here," Colette whispered, tears spilling without control. "I'm here. I'll never leave you again. I swear." That night, Colette found a hidden corner inside an abandoned subway station. She held Rosie against her all night, using her own body heat to keep the girl from freezing to death. She sang the lullabies she could still remember. She told fairy tales she'd once read. She talked to Rosie about her mother, about the good memories, about the love Vera had for her daughter. Rosie didn't say a single word, but she cried. For the first time in 2 years of silence, she cried out loud, a choked, painful sound, as if all the grief she'd held inside for so long had finally found a way out. In the days that followed, Colette did whatever she could to keep the two of them alive. She found a night shift waitressing job at a cheap bar, the kind of place where no one asked for papers or a background. The pay was small, only enough to rent a 10-square-meter room in the slums. But it was a roof, 4 walls, a door that could lock, a bed where Rosie could sleep without fear of rats biting her. Colette began learning sign language. She borrowed books from the public library, the only place that was free and heated. Every morning she studied, then in the afternoons, she taught Rosie what she'd learned. At first, it was simple signs: hungry, thirsty, tired, afraid. Little by little, it grew more complex. Happy, sad, miss Mom, love Auntie. Rosie couldn't speak, but she could hear everything. She understood everything. And with her small hands, she began to tell Colette what she knew. About the night her mother died, about the man with the gun, about the USB drive her mother had hidden inside the teddy bear's belly before picking her up from daycare, warning her to keep it secret, never to tell anyone. Colette held Rosie tight after the girl finished. Two people reduced to nothing. Two broken pieces tossed aside by life, leaning on each other to survive, and together, waiting for the day they could take back justice. The night after the gala, Harrison Cole walked out of the Cook County Police Station with a triumphant smile on his lips. His attorney, one of the most expensive names in Chicago, had worked through the night. He argued there was no direct evidence that Harrison had slipped poison into the champagne glass. No video, no fingerprints on the vial, only the testimony of a mute child and a homeless woman, people with no legally credible standing. Judge Edwin Price, who'd been receiving charitable contributions from Harrison for 10 years, nodded and granted bail in the amount of $5 million. $5 million, and for Harrison it was pocket change. He climbed into the gleaming black Bentley waiting outside, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of whiskey from the car's minibar. His hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, from rage. A rage that had been boiling all night in the holding cell, waiting to be unleashed. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Holt. His voice was steel cold. Get here, right now. 40 minutes later, Dr. Franklin Holt sat across from Harrison in the private office of his mansion. Holt was 55, gray-haired, with the respectable face of a trusted family physician, but behind that polished surface was the man who'd helped Harrison bury countless crimes. Writing fake prescriptions, falsifying medical records, and sometimes, when Harrison needed it, handling the kind of problems money couldn't solve. That nurse, Harrison ground out, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and liquor. Colette Shaw. You know her? Holt nodded slowly. The nurse at St. Mary's. 3 years ago. She got fired for stealing meds. I know. Harrison slammed his hand on the desk. I'm the one who got her fired. But I didn't expect her to still be alive. To come back. To stand in front of me and ruin everything. He stood and began pacing like a caged animal. And the kid. The mute kid. Vera Dawson's daughter. You remember Vera, don't you? That nosy secretary I had to deal with 2 years ago. Holt swallowed, his throat gone dry. I remember. That kid saw me drop the poison into the champagne. Harrison turned, his eyes black as a pit. She signed it for the whole room to see. She pointed right at my face. If she testifies in court, if she writes down what she knows, I'm finished. But she's just a mute child. Holt tried to soothe him. Her statement won't hold weight. Don't be stupid, Harrison roared. You think I'm scared of court? I can buy court, but I can't buy the press. I can't buy public opinion. If the story about that kid gets out, if people start digging into the past, they'll find Vera. They'll find the 150 million. They'll find everything. And then no lawyer on earth can save me. Harrison stopped in front of Holt and bent down, staring straight into his eyes. I want you to take care of them. Both of them. The nurse and the mute kid. Holt went pale. Harrison, killing an adult is one thing, but a child. She's the only witness. Harrison cut him off, his voice without a flicker of hesitation. She saw me kill her mother 2 years ago. She just watched me try to kill my brother. She's the biggest threat I've got right now, and I don't let threats live. He poured more whiskey and drained it in a single swallow. Last time you let the kid slip through. That was a mistake. This time, you don't get to make a mistake. Find them. Clean it up. No traces. Holt sat there, hands trembling on his thighs. He'd done plenty of evil in his life, but killing an 8-year-old was a line he'd never imagined he'd have to cross. But when he looked into Harrison's eyes, he knew he didn't have a choice. I understand, he said, his voice hoarse. It'll be done within 48 hours. Colette's room was on the 3rd floor of a worn-out building on the south side, the kind of place the police rarely patrolled and where people learned not to ask questions about one another. 10 square meters, a single bed, a tiny gas burner, a shared toilet at the end of the hall, mold on the walls, a window that wouldn't seal shut. But it was home, the only place Colette had been able to call home for the past 2 years. That night, after coming back from the gala, Colette couldn't sleep. She sat on the bed with her back against the cold wall, watching Rosie curled up beside her. The girl was exhausted after a night of upheaval. Yet even in sleep, her face held no peace. Brows drawn tight, lips moving faintly as if she were trying to speak inside a dream. Her arms still wrapped around the old, worn teddy bear. Colette gently stroked the girl's hair, her chest heavy. Had she done the right thing? Standing up in front of 400 people, accusing Harrison Cole, exposing the secret she and Rosie had carried for 2 years. She knew it would bring consequences. She knew Harrison wouldn't let it go. But she hadn't had a choice. If she hadn't acted tonight, Conrad Ashford would be dead, and the only chance to get justice for Vera would be gone forever. A knock sounded at the door, soft but decisive. Colette jolted, her hand instantly reaching for the small paring knife hidden under the pillow. She'd lived long enough on the streets to know nobody knocked at 2 o'clock in the morning with good intentions. Who is it? Beckett Crane. Colette went still. She hadn't expected that name. Not here. Not now. How do you know where I am? I know a lot of things. Beckett's voice came through the thin door, low and even. Open up. I came alone. No one else. Colette hesitated for a few seconds, then slowly opened the door, her hand still keeping the knife behind her back. Beckett Crane stood there, still in his black suit, but with his tie removed, his collar open. He looked past Colette into the room, gray eyes sweeping quickly over the cramped space, sliding over Rosie asleep on the bed, then settling on Colette's guarded face. "What are you planning to do with that knife?" he asked, sounding neither threatened nor impressed. "Stab me?" Colette tightened her grip on the handle. "If you touch the child, I will." "I'm not here to hurt you or the girl," Beckett said. "I'm here to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "Harrison Cole just made bail." "An hour ago," Beckett said, his voice flat cold. "Judge Edwin Price signed the order. $5 million. He's at home right now, drinking and making plans to kill you." Colette felt the blood drain from her body. "How do you know?" "I've got people in every corner of this city," Beckett replied. "Harrison just contacted someone named Franklin Holt, the Cole family's private doctor, also the man who's helped Harrison cover up a lot in the past. He ordered Holt to take care of you and the child within 48 hours. Colette stumbled back a step, legs trembling. "Why are you telling me? Why do you care?" Beckett looked at her. His gray eyes still revealed nothing, but they weren't as hard as they'd been at the gala. "I've got a few debts with Harrison Cole. He took things from me that money can't buy back. I've been waiting for the chance to get even for 5 years. And you, Colette Shaw, you're that chance." Colette shook her head. "I don't want anything to do with the Mafia." "You think you've got a choice?" Beckett asked. Not harsh, just blunt. "You don't have money. You don't have power. You don't have anyone protecting you. The police won't help you because Harrison bought them. The courts won't help you because Harrison owns the judge. You've got 2 options. Either let me help or wait to die. I survived 2 years on the streets without anyone helping me." "The streets aren't Harrison Cole," Beckett said. "The streets don't hire professional killers. The streets don't have a surveillance network all over the city. You might be able to hide for a night, 2 nights, a week. But you can't hide forever. And what about that child? How long are you going to keep dragging her through a life on the run?" Colette fell silent. She knew Beckett was right. She could endure. She could run. But Rosie couldn't. Rosie was only an 8-year-old who'd already endured far too much. Suddenly, a small hand touched Colette's arm. She turned. Rosie had woken up at some point, wide eyes looking up at her, then over at Beckett. The girl began to sign, slow and clear. "Auntie, he isn't lying. I can see his eyes. They look like yours when you promise you'll protect me." Colette looked at Rosie, then at Beckett. The man stood there in silence, not pushing, not threatening, only waiting. She drew a deep breath and closed her eyes. "All right," she said, her voice tired but firm. "I'll do it. But if you hurt her, I swear I'll kill you, even if it costs me my life." Beckett nodded, without a hint of surprise. "I don't doubt it. Pack your things. We're leaving right now." Colette didn't go back to the room. She stood there in the dark hallway, watching Beckett's back fade away, and her feet felt nailed to the floor. She knew she should leave, should grab Rosie and run, but something in that man's voice kept her from taking the next step. She set her backpack down and walked in the direction Beckett had disappeared. He was sitting in the first-floor sitting room, in front of a fireplace that burned low and thin. The whiskey in his glass was already half gone. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't turn around, only tipped his head slightly. "Change your mind?" Colette didn't answer. She moved around and sat in the chair across from him. Firelight danced over her face, hiding the dark circles beneath her eyes and softening the constant edge of caution. "You said you know about me," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "So what do you know?" Beckett looked at her, gray eyes reflecting flame. "I know you were 24 when you lost everything. I know you slept under the Interstate 94 overpass through that first winter. I know you nearly froze to death at least 3 times. I know you're still alive, even though the whole world wanted you gone." Colette gave a brittle little laugh. "You hired someone to follow me?" "No," Beckett said. "I recognized you, because I used to be you." Colette went quiet, waiting. Beckett stared into the fire, his voice dropping, as if he were speaking to himself more than to her. "My mother died when I was 12. Her boyfriend beat her to death, right in the apartment where we lived. I heard everything from the next room. I heard her begging. I heard the fists and kicks. I heard her stop breathing." He paused, jaw tightening. "I was 12, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save her. I just lay there shaking, praying it would stop." Colette felt as if someone had wrapped a hand around her throat. "After that, my father disappeared. A useless drunk who never cared about us. When my mother died, he vanished as if he'd never existed. I went into foster care, ran away, got sent back, ran away again. By 14, I was living under an overpass on the south side, eating from trash cans, sleeping on cardboard, fighting other street kids for food." He turned to look at Colette, and his eyes were no longer as cold as before. "You think I was born Mafia? I wasn't. I was born a discarded kid, like Rosie, like you. I just happened to survive long enough to become what I am now." Colette studied him, and for the first time she didn't see a powerful crime boss. She saw a 12-year-old child curled up in a room, listening to his mother die, unable to move. "I know that feeling," she said, her voice trembling. "The helplessness, the feeling of being thrown away." She looked down at her hands, the calluses, the small scars from her years on the street. "But you know what the worst part is? It isn't hunger. It isn't the cold. It's being made invisible." Her voice caught. "It's walking down the street and people looking straight through you like you don't exist. It's applying for work and they see the address and shake their heads before you even get to speak. It's sitting in the corner of a church praying and the pastor walks past without even glancing at you." Tears began to fall, but Colette didn't bother wiping them away. "I used to be a nurse. I saved people. I mattered. Then one day I became trash. Something people stepped over on the sidewalk. A zero. And nobody even asked why. Nobody cared what I'd done wrong. I just disappeared." Beckett listened in silence. He didn't comfort her. He didn't offer empty lines like "everything will be fine." He just sat there, looking at her. And somehow that silence made her feel more heard than any words ever could. "You're not invisible to me," he said at last, his voice low and slow. "At the gala, when you ran into the middle of 400 people to save a stranger, you were the only person I truly saw." Colette looked up, eyes wet and red. "Why?" Because you're brave," Beckett answered. "Because you've got nothing, and you still stood up. The rich people in that room, they've got everything, but they didn't dare do anything. You've only got empty hands and a mute child, and you still faced a demon. That's something money can't buy." They sat there in silence, the fire in the fireplace dying down, but neither of them reached for more wood. For the first time in a long time, Colette felt seen, not as a homeless woman, not as a victim, but as a human being. And when she looked at Beckett, she no longer saw only a mafia boss. She saw a man who had walked through hell and was still trying to find his way back. The next morning, Colette woke up on a chair in the living room. Someone had draped a thin blanket over her. The fireplace had gone out, but warm sunlight was pouring through the large glass window. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, trying to remember when she'd drifted off. Her conversation with Beckett had lasted until nearly 5 o'clock. For the first time in 2 years, she'd said out loud the things she'd been carrying inside, without being afraid of judgment. She made her way upstairs to the room, where Rosie was sitting on the bed, the old teddy bear clutched tight in her arms. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw Colette step in. "Auntie," Rosie began to sign, her movements quick and urgent, as if she'd been waiting all night to say this. I remember now. I remember something important. Colette sat down beside her, unease rising in her chest. What is it, sweetheart? Rosie looked down at the teddy bear in her hands, small fingers stroking the worn fabric. Then she looked up and signed slowly, clearly. This isn't the bear my mom gave me. That bear is still at the orphanage. They wouldn't let me take it when I ran away. They threw it into the storage for old things. Colette frowned, not yet understanding why that mattered. And inside that bear, Rosie continued, her eyes beginning to redden. Mom hid the USB drive. She sewed it in before she picked me up from daycare that day. She told me it was our secret. She told me to keep it secret, not to tell anyone. So I didn't. I kept the secret for 2 years. Colette's heart stuttered. The USB? The one your mom copied the evidence about Harrison onto? Rosie nodded, tears starting to slide down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I didn't remember sooner. I was so scared. I tried to forget that night. I tried to forget everything. But last night I dreamed about Mom, she reminded me. She said it was time to say it. Colette pulled the girl into her arms, her heart pounding with hope and fear tangled together. She took Rosie downstairs at once, to the living room where Beckett and his loyal right-hand man, Jared Cross, were sitting, discussing something. If that USB is still there, Beckett said, his voice low, then it's direct evidence of Harrison's embezzlement. Combined with Rosie's testimony about the murder, he won't get out. But it's at the orphanage, Colette said. Street Agnes. How do we get it? Jared opened his laptop and typed rapidly. Street Agnes. A Catholic church-run orphanage. Security's not high, only a few guards on night patrol. The storage is in the basement. He looked up. It won't be hard to get in. Beckett nodded. We go tonight, 2 o'clock in the morning. Jared and Colette go inside. I'll wait outside in the car with Rosie. Colette blinked, surprised. You're coming? You think I'm going to sit here drinking whiskey while you risk your life? Beckett lifted an eyebrow. I told you I'd help. I don't say things for show. Rosie stepped forward and tugged lightly on Beckett's sleeve. She signed, her eyes full of worry. My bear is brown. It has a red bow at the neck. Its belly has a seam sewn with white thread. Mom wasn't very good at sewing, so the stitches are a little ugly. But I'll recognize it right away. Beckett looked at her, his expression softening in a strange, unexpected way. Don't worry, we'll bring your bear back to you. Tonight, everything would change. Colette knew that. She just didn't know in which direction. 2 o'clock in the morning. Street Agnes Orphanage lay drowned in darkness and a frightening kind of silence. The 3-story red brick building sat at the edge of a poor neighborhood on Chicago's south side, surrounded by a rusting iron fence and overgrown bushes no one bothered to trim. Weak yellow light from a few street lamps spilled down, throwing long black shadows across the damp ground. A black Rolls-Royce was parked 2 blocks away, hidden in the darkness of a narrow alley. Beckett sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the building, ears sharp as he listened for every sound through the radio. Rosie sat in the back, clutching the old teddy bear in her arms, wide eyes glued to the window as if she could see through the night to where Aunt Colette was. Remember what I told you, Jared whispered to Colette as they pressed close to the east wall of the building. Move light. Don't make noise. If anything happens, you run first. I handle it. Colette nodded, her heart pounding hard in her chest. She wasn't the kind of person who took risks. For 2 years, she'd survived by avoiding trouble, not running toward it. But tonight was different. Tonight she had a purpose. She had Rosie to protect. She had Vera who deserved justice. Jared led the way, climbing onto the low awning with the quick, practiced movements of someone used to assignments like this. He used a small knife to pry at a first-floor window frame that opened into the laundry room. Metal scraped softly, then the window gave. Jared slipped in first and turned to help Colette climb in after him. Inside, it was pitch black. The smell of cheap detergent and damp mildew hit Colette's nose. She clicked on a small flashlight, the weak beam sweeping over a room full of old washing machines and piles of clothing waiting to be sorted. Stairs to the basement are at the end of the hall on the right, Jared said, his voice low as breath. From the layout I found, the storage room is in the northeast corner. They moved like shadows, steps so light they barely seemed to touch the floor. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of an exit sign at the far end. Colette forced herself not to think about the children sleeping behind closed doors. Children like Rosie. Children the world had thrown away. The stairs down to the basement were old, every step threatening a creak. Colette held her breath, her heart hammering like it might break out of her ribs. But no one came. No other sound rose, except her own tight breathing. The basement was a maze of small rooms packed with old things. Rusted iron beds, wardrobes made from rotting wood, cardboard boxes stacked high, and in the farthest corner, a room with a sign that read, "Lost Items." Jared pushed the door open. The room was filled with what kids left behind when they were transferred or when they ran. Old shoes, torn notebooks, and toys. Piles of dusty, battered toys, abandoned like the children who once owned them. "Find it fast," Jared said, staying by the door to keep watch. Colette tore through box after box, cold sweat running down her spine. Plastic dolls, toy cars, a blue teddy bear, a white teddy bear, a pink teddy bear, no brown bear anywhere. She was about to break when her flashlight swept the farthest corner of the room. A cardboard box with its flaps already open, filled with filthy toys. And at the bottom, almost completely hidden, lay a brown teddy bear, a red bow at its neck, a belly seam stitched with white thread, ugly and uneven. "I found it," Colette whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. She lifted the bear and pressed it to her chest as if she were holding Vera herself. This was it. The evidence Vera had traded her life to protect. The evidence Rosie had kept secret for 2 years. "Someone's here," Jared said suddenly, his voice tight. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Heavy, steady. A flashlight beam cut across the hallway. "Someone down in the basement?" A man's voice called. "Anybody down there?" Colette froze, blood turning to ice. Jared signaled her to hide behind a stack of boxes, then pressed himself to the wall beside the door. The guard stepped in, flashlight sweeping across the room. He was a middle-aged man with a belly, moving slowly, but he had a radio, and if he managed to call it in, Jared moved like lightning. Before the guard could turn, Jared was behind him, one hand clamped over his mouth, the other tightening around his throat. The man struggled for a few seconds, then went limp, unconscious. Jared lowered him to the floor without making a sound. "Go," Jared said, his voice steady. They ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, out through the laundry room window, dropped onto the awning, rolled to the ground, sprinting like something was hunting them straight into the alley where the Rolls-Royce waited. Beckett had the car door open before they reached it. Colette and Jared dove into the back seat, gasping. Rosie immediately wrapped her arms around Colette, eyes shining when she saw the teddy bear in Colette's hands. "I've got it," Colette whispered, tears spilling. "I found it, sweetheart." Beckett hit the gas. The car surged into the night, leaving Street Agnes Orphanage fading behind them. Colette clutched the bear tight, her heart still racing, but inside her chest, a flame of hope was finally catching. They had it. The evidence. The key to burying Harrison Cole. The Rolls-Royce glided silently through Chicago's empty streets at 3 o'clock in the morning, carrying them back to the safe mansion. No one spoke the entire way. Colette held the teddy bear tight against her chest, feeling her heart pound in heavy, deliberate beats. Rosie sat beside her, her hand locked around Colette's, her eyes never leaving the bear she hadn't seen in 2 years. When they reached the mansion, Beckett led them into his private study. Jared closed the door and drew the curtains tight. The room was lit only by a desk lamp, casting a tense, solemn hush over everything. "Open it," Beckett said, his voice low. Colette set the teddy bear on the desk, her hands trembling. She stared at the ugly white stitches across its belly, and Vera's face rose in her mind. Vera, sitting there, sewing in a hurry, maybe only hours before she died, trying to hide the evidence in the safest place she could imagine, inside her daughter's teddy bear, the one place no one would think to look. Jared handed Colette a small knife. She took it, drew a deep breath, then slowly cut along the seam. Old stuffing spilled out. And in the middle of that dirty white cotton, a small black USB drive lay there. Intact. After 2 years, Colette picked it up, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Beckett plugged it into the laptop. The screen lit up. A folder appeared. Inside were dozens of files. The first file was an Excel spreadsheet, a list of money transfers from coal industries to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. A total of $150 million over 3 years. Every transaction carried Harrison Cole's digital signature. The second file was a scan of fake invoices, consulting services that didn't exist, contracts with companies that only existed on paper. Every invoice had been approved by CFO Harrison Cole. But it was the third file that froze the entire room. An email chain between Harrison Cole and an anonymous email address. Sent date, 2 days before Vera died. "She knows too much," Clean it up. Leave no trace. The reply. Understood. It'll look like a robbery. The final email from Harrison. Good. When it's done, transfer the money into the account like usual. Colette read those lines, and the world collapsed all over again. This wasn't suspicion anymore. Not a guess. This was proof. Proof that Harrison Cole had ordered Vera's murder. Proof that her friend's death wasn't an accident, wasn't a random robbery, but a deliberate assassination. Tears started to fall. Colette didn't try to stop them. She hugged the teddy bear, pressed her face into the worn fabric, and cried. Cried for Vera, cried for Rosie, cried for herself, cried for the 2 years of hell all of them had been forced to endure because of a heartless monster. Rosie stepped closer and wrapped her arms around Colette from behind, her small body trembling. Beckett stood there, his face unreadable, but his gray eyes darkened like a sky before a storm. Enough, he said, his voice steel cold. Enough to bury him. Embezzling $150 million, hiring a killer, trying to murder his brother. No lawyer, no judge, can save him from evidence like this. Colette lifted her head, eyes red and raw. We've got to take this to the FBI. Right now. Tomorrow morning, Beckett said. I've got someone in the FBI. Someone trustworthy. Tomorrow morning we'll meet him. For the first time in 2 years, Colette felt justice within reach. For the first time, she dared to believe this could end, that Harrison would pay, that Vera could finally rest. But she didn't know that miles away, in Harrison Cole's mansion, a screen was replaying security footage from Street Agnes Orphanage. The image of a woman and a man climbing in through a window. The image of them running out with a teddy bear in their hands. Clear footage, impossible to mistake. Harrison stared at the screen, eyes bloodshot with fury. He'd had someone watching the orphanage for 2 years, but they had lost track of the girl the night she ran away. Now, seeing the security footage, he realized the ragged server had been the one hiding his biggest threat all along, and now that caution had paid off. So the kid kept it, he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. That damn USB still exists. He lifted his phone and dialed. Holt. Change of plan. Hit Beckett Crane's mansion. Tomorrow night. Don't leave anyone alive. The following night, Beckett Crane's mansion sank into a false, waiting quiet. At 11 o'clock, Colette had just put Rosie into bed, smoothing the girl's hair until she drifted off. The USB drive was locked in Beckett's safe, waiting for morning, when they would hand it to the FBI contact. Just a few hours. A few more hours and it would be over. Colette couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, staring out at the garden swallowed in darkness. The oak trees swayed in the night wind, throwing long, terrifying shadows that seemed to dance. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, the survival instinct honed by 2 years on the streets. Then the lights went out. The entire mansion dropped into darkness in an instant. Not an ordinary blackout. The security lights outside went out too. The alarm system fell silent. Someone had cut the main power. A gunshot cracked the night open. Colette spun, her heart slamming as if it wanted to burst free. Rosie jolted upright in bed, eyes wide with terror. Screams rose from downstairs, glass shattering, automatic gunfire, men yelling. The door flew open. Jared rushed in, a gun already in his hand, his face tight as a wire. Move. Now. Harrison sent people. 20 shooters. Maybe more. Colette didn't have time to think. She scooped Rosie up, the girl clinging to her neck, her small body shaking uncontrollably. They ran into the pitch-dark hallway. The gunfire was closer now. Muzzle flashes flared on the staircase, lighting up unfamiliar faces charging in. Beckett appeared at the far end of the hall, his shirt smeared with blood, smoke still curling from the gun in his hand. The escape bunker. Behind the kitchen. Jared, get them down. What about you? Jared demanded. I'll hold them off. Go. Don't look back. Jared grabbed Colette's arm and hauled her down the corridor toward the kitchen. Bullets hissed past their heads. One slammed into the wall just centimeters from Colette's shoulder. She tightened her hold on Rosie, shielding the child with her own body. The kitchen was black. Jared guided them with a small flashlight mounted to his gun. He yanked the refrigerator aside, revealing a hidden steel door set into the wall. A code. The door opened. Inside was a stairwell dropping into an underground bunker. Go down, Jared said, shoving Colette toward the stairs. The tunnel leads out to the tree line behind the property, about 200 meters from here. Don't stop. What about you? Colette asked, her voice shaking. Jared didn't answer. He looked at Rosie, arms locked tight around Colette's neck, wide eyes full of fear. In that moment, it was as if he was seeing someone else, his little sister, 13 years old, the one he hadn't reached in time, not before their father's violence shattered her. She'd gone silent for years afterward, just like Rosie. "Run," Jared said, his voice suddenly softer. "I'll hold them here. No one gets through this door while I'm still breathing." Footsteps were closing in. Shouts. Gunfire. Nearer and nearer. Jared looked at Colette one last time. "Promise me one thing." "What?" "Protect the girl. No matter what happens tonight, don't let her suffer anymore. I didn't save my sister in time. I don't want Rosie to become my sister." Tears spilled from Colette's eyes. "Jared, go," Jared roared, shoving her onto the stairs. "Run." The steel door slammed shut behind Colette. She clutched Rosie and ran down the steps, into the black tunnel, gunfire thundering behind them, growing wilder by the second. She ran like she'd never run in her life, tears streaming down her face, her heart feeling torn apart. Above them, Jared Cross stood in front of the bunker door, gun gripped in both hands. 4 of Harrison's gunmen stormed into the kitchen, flashlights sweeping wildly. Jared dropped the first man before he could even react. The second went down with a bullet through his chest, but the third and fourth managed to find cover, returning fire in a brutal spray. Jared took a hit in the shoulder. Hot blood poured out. He didn't stop. He kept firing, kept blocking. Every second he held was another second Colette and Rosie could get farther away. The second bullet tore into his abdomen. Jared collapsed, his back sliding down against the steel door. Blood was spilling faster now. He knew he wasn't going to make it. But he still lifted the gun and shot the third man as he rushed forward. In his final seconds, Jared thought of his sister. Her face when he finally pulled her out of hell. The rare smile she'd given him after years of silence. "Little sister," he whispered, the corner of his mouth lifting into a faint smile. "I kept my promise." The third bullet punched through his heart. Jared Cross went down, his eyes still open, his face peaceful, as if he'd finally been allowed to rest. The tunnel was black as ink, the air damp with mildew and biting cold. Colette ran like she'd lost her mind, one arm locked around Rosie, the other hand scraping along the wet wall to keep her bearings. She couldn't see anything. She could only feel the ground under her feet and hear her own ragged breathing echoing in the tight space. Rosie clung to her neck, her small body trembling uncontrollably. She wasn't crying. She'd lived with fear too long to have tears left to spend. But Colette could feel every shiver traveling into her skin, and it made her run even faster. Behind them, the gunfire had stopped. That silence was more terrifying than the shots. It meant Jared had gone down. It meant the attackers were finding their way into the bunker. Colette swallowed her sobs. She didn't have time to mourn Jared. No time to grieve. She had to live. She had to protect Rosie. That was the last promise she'd given the man who had just died for them. A faint glow appeared at the end of the tunnel. The exit. Colette pushed harder, lungs burning as if they might explode, legs ready to buckle. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. She burst out of the tunnel, and the cold night air slammed into her face. The edge of the woods, thick trees, moonlight filtering weakly through the canopy, laying a pale sheen on a narrow path that disappeared into the deeper forest. Colette took one step forward, then froze. Harrison Cole stood there, holding a tablet showing the mansion's perimeter heat map, less than 10 meters away, a gun aimed straight at them. "You thought you could get away?" His voice was steel cold, but there was something unhinged in his bloodshot eyes, raw with sleeplessness and rage. He was still wearing an expensive suit, but his tie hung crooked. His hair was wild, his face twisted with hatred. Colette backed up one step, tightening her hold on Rosie. She glanced around for an escape. There wasn't one. Behind her was the tunnel, where the attackers were closing in. In front of her was Harrison, and the gun that could end everything. "What do you want?" Colette asked, her voice shaking, forcing herself to sound steady. "You know what I want." Harrison moved closer, the gun never leaving her chest. "The USB. Where is it?" "It's gone. I already sent it to the FBI." Harrison laughed, a dry sound like bone snapping. "Liar. You think I'm stupid? I know you took it from the orphanage last night. I know it's in Beckett's safe. And I know you haven't had time to hand it to anyone." Colette didn't answer. He was right. The USB was still back at the mansion, in the safe that by now had probably fallen into enemy hands. Harrison took another step, then swung the gun, so it pointed straight at Rosie's head. "This kid," he said, contempt thick in his voice. This deaf-mute kid. She saw me at the gala, pointed right at my face in front of 400 people. She's the only witness left. Colette shoved Rosie behind her, using her own body as a shield. If you want to kill me, then do it. But let her go. She's just a child. A child? Harrison laughed loud, the sound echoing through the night woods. This kid is the biggest threat I've got. She saw me kill her mother 2 years ago. She saw me poison Conrad's drink. If she goes to court, if she writes down what she knows, I lose everything. He raised the gun to eye level, sighting in on Rosie. I should have finished her that night, too, along with her mother. But some idiot let her live. The most expensive mistake I've ever made. Colette felt her blood turn to ice. She knew Harrison was going to pull the trigger. She knew she was about to die. She knew Rosie was about to die. And she couldn't do a thing. But then, something impossible happened. Rosie stepped out from behind Colette's back. She stood there, small and thin, facing the gun of the man who'd killed her mother. Her wide eyes weren't afraid anymore. There was only one thing burning inside them: hatred and resolve. Then she opened her mouth. The voice was no more than breath, rough from 2 years of disuse, but clear, firm. I saw. Harrison froze, eyes widening in shock. You killed my mom. One word at a time, slow, painful, as if each word was being torn out from the deepest place inside her. The place it had been locked away for 2 years. You, Harrison stammered, the gun in his hand trembling. You can talk? Rosie took another step forward, her eyes never leaving his. I remember your face. I remember the gunshot. I remember my mom's blood. Harrison stumbled back, his face gone the color of death. He'd believed the girl was mute forever. He'd believed she could never testify. He'd believed his secret was safe for good. But now she was standing in front of him, speaking the truth he'd killed to hide. Shut up! Harrison screamed, his voice cracked and wild. Shut up, freak! He lifted the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Bang! The gunshot ripped the night apart. But it didn't come from Harrison's weapon. Harrison screamed. The gun fell from his hand as he staggered backward and collapsed. Blood poured from his right shoulder, staining his expensive suit jacket a violent red. He hit the ground hard, one hand clamped over the wound, his face twisted with pain. Beckett Crane stepped out of the forest shadows. His shirt was smeared with blood, one sleeve torn wide open, his face cold as ice. But he was standing, still alive, still holding the smoking gun in his hand. Beckett! Colette shouted, tears spilling with sudden relief. Beckett didn't look at her. His gray eyes stayed locked on Harrison, writhing on the ground. He walked forward, each step slow and steady, like death coming to collect what it was owed. 5 years, Beckett said, his voice low and cold. 5 years I've waited for this day. The day I could stand in front of you and see you like this. Harrison tried to crawl backward, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face drained white with fear. Beckett, listen to me. We can negotiate. I've got money. Any amount. 10 million. 20 million. Whatever you want. Money? Beckett gave a short, bitter laugh. You think money buys everything? You think it buys back the people you killed? The lives you destroyed? He stopped in front of Harrison and raised the gun, the barrel aimed straight at his forehead. You killed Colette's friend. You destroyed her life. You forced an innocent child into silence for 2 years. You killed Jared. Beckett's voice trembled with rage. Aird Cross, my brother in arms, the best man I ever knew. You killed him, Harrison cried. Not tears of remorse, but the tears of a coward staring into the face of death. Please, don't kill me. I'll do anything. I'll go to prison. I'll confess to everything. Please. Beckett stared down at him, finger tightening on the trigger. He wanted to pull it, to end it right here, to see Harrison Cole's blood and brains splatter across the dirt. It was the dream he'd carried for 5 years. Don't. Colette's voice cut in, gentle but unshakable. Beckett didn't turn, but his hand hesitated. Don't kill him, Beckett. Colette stepped closer, stopping beside him. I understand what you want. I understand how long you've waited for this. But if you pull the trigger, you won't be any different from him. He deserves to die. Beckett snarled, his voice shaking. Yes, he deserves to die, Colette said. But not by your hand. Not like this. If you kill him, you'll become a murderer. And Rosie. She looked toward the little girl standing there, wide eyes fixed on them. Rosie needs to see that justice exists, that evil is punished by the law, not by a bullet. Otherwise, she'll grow up believing violence is the only answer. Beckett still didn't lower the gun. His jaw clenched hard, his eyes bloodshot. Then a small hand touched his arm. Rosie stood beside Beckett, looking up at him. She didn't sign. She opened her mouth and spoke, her voice still rough and trembling, but clearer than before. "Please, don't be like him." Beckett looked down at her, looked into eyes so clear, so wounded, yet still believing in something good. Eyes like Jared's sister, the eyes of children battered by life, but unwilling to let go of hope. His hand started to shake. The finger on the trigger loosened. Then he lowered the gun. "The police are coming," Beckett said, his voice worn out. "Conrad called the FBI before they attacked. I had someone warn him." As if to prove his words, sirens rose in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights swept through the trees, washing the dark woods in flashing color. Harrison lay there, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, staring up at the night sky in despair. He knew it was over. Money, power, the relationships he'd built for years, all of it meant nothing against what was coming. FBI vehicles surged in. Agents flooded the woods with flashlights and guns drawn. They surrounded Harrison and cuffed him, even though he was wounded. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone read him his Miranda rights. Colette stood there with Rosie in her arms, watching Harrison get dragged away. She didn't feel happy. She didn't feel satisfied, only empty and tired. Vera was dead. Jared was dead. So much suffering, so much loss, all because of one man's greed and cruelty. Beckett stepped to her side and laid a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said, his voice low. "He'll never be able to hurt anyone again." Colette nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. It was over. At last, it was over. 2 months later, a federal courtroom in Chicago was packed wall to wall. National media covered it nonstop. Camera crews lined up outside the building. This was the most anticipated trial of the year, the case the entire country was following, watching every turn. Harrison Cole sat at the defendant's table in an orange jail uniform, wrists cuffed, his face hollow and gray. He was no longer the powerful chief financial officer of Cole Industries, no longer the man in a tailored Tom Ford suit, smiling with triumph in front of 400 VIP guests. Now he was only a criminal waiting for judgment. Colette sat a few rows behind the prosecutor, her hand gripping Rosie's. She'd changed in the last 2 months. She wasn't thin and washed out anymore. She no longer carried the wild eyes of someone always running. She'd been fed, she'd slept in safety, she'd received medical care, but more than that, she'd watched justice begin to take shape. Beckett sat a few rows away, his expression as unreadable as ever. He wasn't here as a witness, but as an observer, a man who'd waited 5 years for this day. "The court calls the next witness," Judge Margaret Chen announced, her voice formal. "Rosie Dawson." Colette felt her heart tighten when Rosie stood. 8 years old, wearing a pale blue dress Colette had bought her, hair neatly parted into 2 small braids. She walked to the witness stand, small and fragile in a room full of unfamiliar adults. The prosecutor approached, voice gentle, the way someone spoke to a granddaughter. "Rosie, can you tell everyone about the night your mother died?" Rosie looked toward Colette. Colette nodded encouragement, eyes wet. Then the girl began to speak. "Me and Mom walked home." Rosie's voice was small and shaking, but each word came clear. "Mom picked me up from daycare. She said she had something important today. She gave me my teddy bear. She said keep it secret. And then..." Rosie stopped, her eyes turning red. "Someone stepped out of the dark. I saw a gun. I heard the bang. Mom fell down. Blood. Blood was everywhere." Tears slid down Rosie's cheeks, but she kept going, her voice breaking yet stubborn. "I saw his face. He bent down and took something from Mom's bag. Then he looked at me. I was so scared. I wanted to call Mom, but I couldn't talk anymore. From that night on, I couldn't talk anymore." She lifted her head and looked straight at Harrison Cole. "Until I saw him again. At the party, I saw him put something into the drink. Like that night, I remembered. I remembered everything." The courtroom went so still, no one seemed to breathe. No one moved. Harrison's defense attorney stood, his face hard. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness was mute for 2 years due to psychological trauma. Her testimony is unreliable." Children's memories are easily distorted and influenced by adults. She may have been coached to say these things. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Colette felt heat surge through her blood. She couldn't sit still anymore. She stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to speak." Judge Chen looked at her, frowning. "Who are you?" "Colette Shaw, Rosie's guardian, and also a victim of Harrison Cole." After a brief hesitation, the judge nodded. "Granted." Colette stepped into the middle of the courtroom, her voice trembling but filled with resolve. Rosie wasn't coached to say this. She was silent for 2 years because the trauma of watching her mother get killed was too great. She stayed quiet. She buried that pain inside, because no one was willing to listen, because no one believed a mute child. She turned toward the jury. "I was a victim of Harrison Cole too. 3 years ago, I was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I refused his advances. He framed me for stealing medication, and I lost my license, my job, my home. I lived on the streets for 2 years. No one believed me, because I was only a nurse, and he was the chief financial officer of a multi-billion-dollar corporation." Colette's voice caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Vera Dawson, Rosie's mother, was my friend. She discovered Harrison was embezzling company money. She tried to stand up for what was right, and she died for it, in front of her own daughter." She looked at Rosie, sitting on the witness stand, tears pouring down her face, but her chin lifted high. Rosie stayed silent for 2 years, but tonight she was brave enough to stand up and tell the truth. She's only 8 years old, but she's braver than anyone in this room. Please listen to her. Please give her the justice she deserves. Colette returned to her seat, her whole body shaking. Rosie ran down from the witness stand and threw her arms around her, sobbing. The trial continued with other evidence. The USB drive containing files of $150 million in embezzlement, Harrison's email ordering Vera's murder, the testimony of Dr. Franklin Holt, who agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter sentence. Everything pointed in one direction. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the entire courtroom held its breath. On the charge of first-degree murder of Vera Dawson, the jury finds guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Conrad Ashford, the jury finds guilty. On the charges of embezzlement and money laundering, the jury finds guilty. Harrison Cole collapsed over the table, his face white as paper. Judge Chen delivered the sentence. "Harrison Cole, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Applause erupted. Crying, cheers. Colette held Rosie tight, tears pouring without control. It was over. At last, justice had been done. 3 weeks later, Colette received an envelope from the Illinois Medical Board. Inside was a new nursing license, along with an official letter of apology for the false accusation 3 years earlier. She'd been cleared. She'd been given back everything that had been stolen from her. She pressed the license to her chest and cried like a child, not from sorrow, but because after so many years of pain, she was finally being seen as human again. 1 year later, Chicago was still as busy and loud as ever. But for Colette Shaw, the city was completely different now. It wasn't a place she had to run from anymore, not a maze of dark alleys and filthy trash cans. Chicago was home now. It was where she belonged. This morning, Colette woke up at 6 o'clock in a compact 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. Not a lavish mansion, not the damp 10-square-meter room from before, just a normal apartment. Just enough for 2 people, warm and full of light. She had refused financial help from Conrad Ashford, and she'd refused Beckett's offer too. She wanted to rebuild her life herself, with her own hands and her own work. She put on her crisp white nurse's uniform, looked at herself in the mirror, and smiled. Ashford Memorial Hospital. The hospital Conrad Ashford had founded to honor loved ones he'd lost. Hired her the moment she was cleared. The ICU, her specialty. She was back to the work she loved, the work she'd been born to do. "Auntie, I can't find my math book." A bright, clear voice called from the next room. Rosie, 9 years old, stood by her backpack with worry on her face. She'd changed so much in a year, taller, healthier, and most important, she could speak normally now, like any other child. The therapist called it a miracle, but Colette knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the result of love, patience, and the safety the girl had finally been allowed to feel. "It's on your desk, top right corner," Colette said, stepping into Rosie's room. The small room was decorated with Rosie's own drawings. A house, a blue sky, 2 women holding hands with a small child, and at the corner of the bed, the brown teddy bear with the red bow still sat in a place of honor. The bear Vera had hidden the secret inside, the bear that had helped bring justice to them all. Colette walked Rosie to school and kissed her forehead at the gate. "Do well today. I'll pick you up this afternoon." "Auntie," Rosie said, taking Colette's hand, eyes sparkling. "Do you know what day it is today?" Colette smiled. She did know. Today was Vera's first death anniversary, counted by the lunar calendar Vera used to follow. "I know. This afternoon we'll go visit your mom. All right?" Rosie nodded and hugged Colette one more time before running through the school gate, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. In the afternoon, after a 12-hour shift, Colette came home with aching legs but a lighter heart. She opened the door, turned on the light, and as always her eyes went to the photo on the refrigerator. Vera Dawson smiled from the frame, holding Rosie when she was 4. A radiant smile, warm eyes. Colette's closest friend, the woman who had sacrificed her life to protect the truth. "Vera," Colette whispered, fingertips brushing the frame. "Rosie's grown. She's doing so well in school. She draws so beautifully. She's so much like you." The doorbell rang. Colette wiped her tears and went to open the door. Beckett Crane stood there, not in his usual black suit, but in a t-shirt and jeans, less intimidating and more human. In one hand he held a large pizza box. In the other, a brand new teddy bear, light brown with a pink bow. "I heard today is a special day," he said, his voice low but warmer than it used to be. "Figured you and the kid might need some company." Colette looked at him, at the teddy bear, at the pizza still steaming with heat. Over the past year, Beckett had kept showing up, never loud, never dramatic. Just simple dinners, trips to the park with Rosie, late-night conversations when Colette couldn't sleep. He never demanded anything, never pushed. He simply stayed, like a friend, like part of the small family they'd accidentally built. "Come in," Colette said with a smile, stepping aside. "Make yourself at home." Beckett walked in and set the pizza on the table. Rosie came running out of her room, eyes bright when she saw the teddy bear. "Uncle Beckett!" She jumped up and hugged him, her clear laughter filling the little apartment. That night, they sat together at the table, sharing hot slices of pizza, trading small stories from the day. Rosie showed off her perfect score in art. Colette talked about an elderly patient who'd recovered after surgery. Beckett listened quietly, adding a short comment now and then. Looking at that scene, Colette felt something warm spread through her in a strange, steady way. This wasn't family in the traditional sense. No blood ties, no marriage, just 3 people who'd walked through hell and found each other on the other side. Before bed, Rosie placed the new teddy bear next to the old one on her pillow. "Now Mom's bear has a friend," she said innocently. "Just like I've got Auntie and Uncle Beckett." Colette held her, kissed her forehead, and thought of Vera, thought of Jared, thought of everyone who'd sacrificed so they could have this day. The story of Colette, Rosie, and Beckett reminds us of a simple truth we sometimes forget in the rush of life. Justice may come late, but justice will come. Evil people may be powerful, may be wealthy, may hide their crimes behind money and connections. But truth, like sunlight, can't be hidden forever. One day it will break through every wall, every lie, and shine into the darkest corners. This story also reminds us that a person's worth isn't measured by the money in their bank account or their social position. Harrison Cole had hundreds of millions of dollars, power, status, but he had no dignity, no conscience, no humanity. Colette, a nurse who was framed, a homeless woman, had something money can't buy: courage, resilience, and unconditional love for a child who wasn't her blood. And Rosie, the little girl who lived in silence for 2 years, taught all of us a lesson that goes deep. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes the smallest people carry the greatest strength. A child's voice, when it's heard, can change the world. The 400 richest people in Chicago didn't see the killer sitting beside them. A mute little girl and a homeless woman saw everything. What does that say about our society? About how we judge people? About the biases we carry without realizing it every day? If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button on our channel so you won't miss more moving stories like this. Please hit like and share this video with the people you love to spread the message of compassion, justice, and faith in what's good. We want to hear what you think. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had moments when you felt abandoned by the world? Do you believe justice will always win? Please share with us in the comments below. We read every comment, and we value every opinion from the deepest place in your hearts. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. No matter how hard life gets, keep believing that light comes after darkness, and you deserve to be happy. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.